Mom had always believed in perfection, or at least in the illusion of it. Every detail of her children's lives was meticulously observed, commented on, and silently judged. Birthdays, school recitals, graduations, none of them were ordinary in her eyes, and now her youngest daughter, Leela, was getting married. Mom's excitement was a force of nature, all-consuming and impossible to ignore. From the moment the engagement ring slipped onto Leela's finger, Mom's mind had been a whirlwind of seating charts, floral arrangements, and color-coordinated napkins. She talked endlessly about linens, the wedding cake, and the photographers. "It will be perfect," she said repeatedly, almost as if declaring it enough would summon perfection into existence. I watched from the sidelines, careful to stay invisible. I clapped politely during planning sessions, smiled at the invitations, and complimented every decision. But inside, I was shrinking into myself. Mom's gaze rarely lingered on me except to compare. Everything I had done, my quiet achievements, my long hours building a career, the life I had carved out for myself, seemed invisible unless it could be measured against Leela's impending spectacle. Dinner that night was suffocating in its familiarity. The table was a picture of domestic perfection, fine china, crystal glasses, and candles that flickered just so. Mom's eyes were bright with pride, the kind that always came with an edge of judgment. "Your sister's wedding will be perfect," she said, her voice thick with satisfaction. Then, without missing a beat, she added, almost teasingly, "When's your turn?" Her words hit me like a slap I wasn't allowed to acknowledge. I smiled, a small, careful smile, nodding politely as if the question didn't sting. But the truth was, my turn had already come in ways she could never understand. My victories were quiet, my successes were invisible unless one looked closely. Mom's obsession with outward perfection blinded her to the ways I had built my life with thought, patience, and resilience. Yet sitting there, listening to her praise, Leela's choices, and discussing centerpieces, as though they defined a person's worth, I felt something stir deep inside me, a mixture of sorrow and defiance. I realized that no applause from her would ever validate me. I had spent too many years waiting for her approval, for acknowledgement that I had earned silently every step of the way. I sipped my water and let the warmth of quiet anger fill me. I was tired of living in the shadows of expectations I had never asked for. I had learned early that love and validation were conditional in our household. My achievements had to be spectacular, theatrical, undeniable, or they didn't exist in Mom's eyes. And even then, they were only points of comparison. That night, as the conversation turned to the color of bridesmaids' dresses and the height of floral arrangements, I made a silent vow. One day, I would celebrate my own life not with a glittering public display that Mom could scrutinize, but with a triumph so complete, so inherently mine, that no one could ever diminish it. The perfect revenge, I realized, was not to seek vengeance at all. It was to live brilliantly, quietly, without her needing to notice. For now I sat at the table, smiling politely, while the storm of anticipation swirled around Leela. But beneath that calm exterior, a plan was forming. My life, my success, my celebration, whatever form it took, would be flawless in its own way. And when it happened, Mom would understand that the measure of a person's worth could never be dictated by glitter, gowns, or ceremonies. After Leela's wedding, the house felt different, lighter. For some, heavier for me. The celebrations had passed, the flowers had wilted, the guests had gone home, and yet the echoes of Mom's obsession lingered in every corner. Pictures of the ceremony, glossy and perfect, lined the shelves, reminding me that perfection, at least in her eyes, was public, visible, and performative. I retreated into silence. I smiled at family gatherings, congratulated Leela, and laughed when appropriate. But inside, I was building something invisible, something that no one could touch. My life had always been quiet, deliberate, and careful, but now it felt like a rebellion. Each day, I carved my own path further from Mom's watchful eyes. I invested in myself, my dreams, and my future in ways she would never see as meaningful because they weren't flashy. It wasn't just the wedding. It was a pattern I had lived under for years. My choices, my successes, my triumphs, they were always compared, always diminished. And yet, I had endured, learned, and thrived quietly. This time I decided it would be different. I wouldn't wait for anyone's approval. I wouldn't measure my life by ceremonies or applause. I would live deliberately, and my life would be the quietest, most devastating proof of my worth. I began to cultivate what I called my hidden victory. It wasn't a wedding, not in the literal sense. It was a life carefully designed to reflect my values, my ambitions, my happiness. I invested in experiences, skills, and relationships that mattered to me, that nourished my soul. I created joy on my own terms. I pursued opportunities my family would have dismissed as ordinary or not impressive enough. Yet each small success, each milestone, was a brick in the foundation of a life no one could question. In the quiet of my apartment, I imagined the day when Mom would ask, "When's your turn?" again. I pictured the shock in her eyes, the way she would struggle to reconcile her image of me with the reality of my accomplishments. I smiled at the thought. The revenge was not anger or confrontation. It was life itself, lived in full bloom, perfectly intact, unbending, and undeniably mine. Even Leela, radiant from her wedding, couldn't see it. She was caught up in the swirl of flowers, dresses, and social expectations. I didn't begrudge her happiness. I had loved her since childhood, but I envied her in the way only someone denied recognition can. The envy of visibility versus invisibility. And yet envy soon transformed into determination. My time would come, not in glittering ceremonies, but in moments so powerful, so final, that no one could overlook them. Months passed, and I continued in this quiet rebellion. I pursued projects at work that I had shelved for fear of criticism. I nurtured friendships and passions that filled spaces in me that family approval never could. Every achievement was my secret celebration, a metaphorical wedding that no one could attend, yet every step felt like a triumph. And so I waited quietly, patiently, letting the world continue its predictable rhythms while I built my own unpredictable, unstoppable reality. I didn't need a ceremony to prove myself. My life, my victories, my quiet brilliance that would be my revenge. It happened at a family gathering, months after Leela's wedding. The house smelled faintly of baked bread and old furniture, the familiar scent of home, the kind of home that had once felt like a stage where every gesture was measured, every word judged. Now I walked through it like someone who had learned the rules well enough to play, but no longer needed anyone's permission to rewrite them. Mom's eyes lit up as soon as she saw me, bright with the usual mixture of pride and expectation. The older daughters had a strange energy around her, one part admiration, one part submission. And as always, she scanned me quickly, silently comparing me to the spectacle that was Leela's life. Then, as if rehearsing a line she had been saying for years, Mom tilted her head and asked, the familiar sharpness in her tone, "When will it be your turn?" For a split second, my heart clenched. I could feel the years of dismissals, comparisons, and whispered judgments pressing down on me. But this time, I was ready. This time, I had the quiet confidence of someone who had already won, someone whose victories didn't require approval or fanfare. I looked at her calm and composed and let the words fall slowly, deliberately, like a verdict. It already happened. The room froze. My mother's mouth opened slightly, as if trying to shape a reply, but no words came. Leela, mid-sentence about a minor family anecdote, blinked confused, her voice trailing off. The air thickened with an unspoken tension. I smiled faintly, just enough to hint at the power behind my calm. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. The implication was enough. My life had flourished quietly, privately, in ways that eclipsed even the grandest wedding. My achievements, my successes, my personal triumphs, they were invisible to everyone but me. Yet they carried a weight that no superficial display could match. Mom's eyes darted away, her composure faltering, searching for some foothold to diminish my words, but there was none. The carefully curated image of perfection she had always valued glittering events. Applause, validation was powerless against the quiet, unstoppable reality of my life. Leela's confusion slowly shifted into realization. She tilted her head, a soft frown forming as she began to understand the subtle but devastating power of my statement. I had never competed with her directly. I had never needed to. My life, my victories, were mine alone, built without anyone's approval, nurtured with patience, and perfected in ways she could never see at first glance. The room remained still, the hum of normalcy suspended by the weight of revelation. I could feel a shift, subtle but undeniable, in the family dynamics. The invisible scales of judgment had tipped, and I was no longer weighed down by comparisons or expectations. I had claimed my victory, not with confrontation, but with the undeniable truth of my life, and in that moment I realized the sweetest revenge was not anger, nor dramatic gestures. It was existence itself, thriving, unbending, undeniable. The wedding that mattered, the triumph that counted, had already occurred, and no one could take it from me. For the first time in years, I felt a quiet smile of satisfaction settle on my face. My life, perfectly my own, had spoken louder than any celebration ever could. The days after the revelation were quiet, almost deceptively so. The usual clamor of family judgment seemed to hesitate, as if everyone had been forced to pause and reconsider their assumptions. Mom, in particular, moved through the house differently. There was no overt apology, no acknowledgement of her oversight. She was too proud for that. But there was a subtle shift in her gaze when she looked at me. For the first time, she measured me not against someone else, but against the undeniable presence of my life and accomplishments. Leela, initially confused and slightly hurt by my statement, began to see the truth behind my words. She would occasionally catch me in moments of quiet triumph, a small award at work, a personal milestone, a new skill mastered, and she would nod, a secret understanding passing between us. She had lived in the spotlight of Mom's expectations for years, but now she recognized the power of living unseen, unjudged, and yet fully realized. The family gatherings became different. Conversations no longer centered solely on weddings, appearances, or outward success. Mom still praised Leela's achievements, of course, but her words toward me had changed. They were softer, tinged with the reluctant acknowledgement that I had built something indestructible, something she could not compare or control. Her questions about my turn faded, replaced by a curious, almost cautious respect. I noticed the subtle changes, but I didn't need external validation. My satisfaction came from the knowledge that my life was mine, unshakable, deliberate, and entirely self-made. The revenge I had imagined in my mind months ago had been realized not through confrontation, but through existence itself. Every quiet victory, every personal triumph, was a testament to my resilience, patience, and determination. No one could diminish that, not Mom, not Leela, not anyone. In these quiet moments I found liberation. I no longer felt the sting of comparison or the weight of unspoken expectations. I could laugh freely, pursue my passions openly, and embrace life on my terms. The perfection Mom had sought in weddings and celebrations was irrelevant. I had discovered a deeper, richer perfection, one rooted in authenticity, independence, and inner fulfillment. Sometimes I caught Mom staring at me, eyes narrowing slightly, perhaps searching for some flaw, some weakness. But there was nothing to find. I had anticipated her scrutiny for years, and had built my life in a way that no criticism could shake. The power dynamic had shifted subtly but irrevocably, and I could sense her adjusting to this new reality, whether she admitted it or not. Leela eventually approached me one evening alone, and said softly, "I get it now. Your life, it's amazing. I never realized how much you've built for yourself." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Recognition from her, the sister who had lived in the limelight, felt like a quiet victory on top of all the others. And in that quiet, private space I smiled, not with triumph over others, but with the serene satisfaction of someone who had reclaimed her narrative. The wedding that mattered, the celebration that counted had already occurred. I had proven without fanfare or spectacle that my worth was undeniable. Life continued as it always does, but I moved forward differently, lighter, stronger, unshakable. My revenge had been subtle, emotional, and complete, and the sweetest part was this: it had required no confrontation, no drama, no applause. just the quiet power of a life fully lived.